Welcome to Brother Miller's Notes. I'm so glad you're with me today as we study Genesis chapters 28 to 33. Do you like riddles? See if you can solve this epic riddle from 1878. And if you want to pause the little video here, you're welcome to. Find first a father's name whose failing powers his son deceived. Then name a father's mother, who the promised heir received. Next name a mother, who in grief her son from home must send. Her husband's father next appears, God's chosen, faithful friend. Then find an only brother's name, who sought his brother's life. And last, a woman, who unloved, became that brother's wife. Now, who was he that with all these relationships could claim? The initial letters of their names combined will give his name. The father, grandfather, the mother, grandmother, and wife. The brother, all are his, who gave a mighty nation life. All right, if you want to work on that, great. I'm going to tell you the answer. If you want to skip it for a minute, you got to pause now and work on this. But the first individual in this poem is Isaac. The failing powers his son deceived, and then that father's mother, Sarah, a mother who in grief sent her son, Rebekah, God's faithful friend, Abraham, brother who sought his life, Esau, a woman who unloved became that brother's wife, Leah, and the first letters of all their names spell Israel. Kind of a really cool riddle. So we start off today in Genesis 21, and we're going to talk about Jacob, whose name's going to be changed today to Israel. And Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him. And just so you know, that Hebrew word charged, it does mean to command, appoint. It also means to ordain. And some have taken that word ordain and maybe had a little deeper meaning with that. But charged him, commanded him, and said unto him, Thou shalt take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. I want you to marry someone who's also in the covenant, a covenant marriage. So verse 2, Arise, go to Pandan Amoron, the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take thee a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And the Lord God Almighty bless thee, and make thee fruitful. Right here, Isaac confirms the blessings of Abraham and the birthright on Jacob. Multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee, and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave unto Abraham. So he's going to start his journey. He's going to start down at the very bottom where you saw that little red ball bouncing, Beersheba. That title, that name, means the well of the oath, or where God promised Isaac the blessings of his father. Maybe the well of his hope. And he's going to go to, it says a certain place. Jewish scholars and rabbis often interpret whenever you see a certain place, that phrase, it emphasizes that the place is holy, set apart. It's special, and it will be. Okay? He's headed to the very top of the map, Haran, which means very dry, parched. When you look at the map, it's parched with sun. Grievous, very bright like the sun. In other words, Jacob is depicting as living the place of the oath, headed into the lone and dreary parched world, and in the process has an encounter of God at a certain place. At that certain place, he gets a stone. And he uses that as his pillow. Not very comfortable. And he has a dream. And in his dream, he sees a ladder stretching to heaven and angels ascending and descending. There have been a lot of artists that have attempted to draw this dream and what he's seeing. President Marion G. Romney commented on this dream and its interpretation, what it all meant, when he said this. When Jacob traveled from Beersheba towards Haran, he had a dream in which he saw himself on the earth at the foot of a ladder that reached to heaven where the Lord stood above it. He beheld angels ascending and descending thereon, and Jacob realized that the covenants he made with the Lord there were the rungs on the ladder that he himself would have to climb in order to obtain the promised blessings. Blessings that would entitle him to enter heaven and associate with the Lord. Because he had met the Lord and entered into covenants with him there, Jacob considered the site so sacred, he named the place Bethel, a contradiction of Beth Elohim, which means literally the house of the Lord. He said of it, "This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob not only passed through the gate of heaven, but by living up to every covenant, he also went all the way in. Of him and his forebears, Abraham and Isaac, the Lord has said, quote, "Because they did none other things than that which they were commanded, they have entered into their exaltation, according to the promises, and sit upon thrones, and are not angels, but are gods." Temples are to us all what Bethel was to Jacob. Even more, they are also the gates to heaven for all of our endowed kindred dead. We should do all of our duty in blessing our loved ones through them. There was a lady who was having a very difficult time. Sarah Fuller Flowers Adams. And she has an experience with these verses and writes a beloved hymn. I just want to share you her background and her story that may bring a little bit of more life to the hymn, and maybe an opportunity as you study this to sing this hymn, to teach some things that will help us better understand this chapter. All her life, as long as she could remember, she had dreamed of becoming a great actress. She'd worked and studied and struggled towards that goal, and at last realized her ambition. At last she had scored dramatic triumph as Lady Macbeth, had been hailed as a great actress, and looked forward to a successful career on the stage. But her triumph was brief, so brief. A sudden, devastating illness had made her an invalid, had taken her from the stage and closed that door to her forever. It was a bitter disappointment. Her minister, Mr. Fox, had come to see her about some poems she was writing, and she had complained about her affliction. The minister had quietly taken the Old Testament from her bookshelves and opened at the story of Jacob's vision at Bethel, and had urged her to read it. She had read it many times before, and she knew the story almost as well as her own. However, as she read it this time, she saw the unmistakable parallel between Jacob's story and her own illness and disappointment. She saw it clearly now, the darkness, the dream, the awakening, the sunshine, the triumph, the joy. She decided to write a poem about it. She was inspired by the theme. She saw the door closed to her own life's ambition as the cross that raiseth me. She saw her illness, her disappointment, her loneliness, her pain as steps to heaven. So by my woes to be nearer to God, to thee, nearer to thee. She wrote it almost without effort, almost as though the words came to her from a powerful outside source. The poem Sarah Adams wrote that afternoon, out of her own great need and her own great faith, has become one of the world's most beloved hymns. In our hymn book, it's hymn 100. The first verse is, "Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee. Eve though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my song shall be, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee." Verse 2, "Though like the wanderer the sun gone down, darkness be over me, my rest a stone, yet in my dreams I'd be, nearer, my God, to thee." Verse 3, "There let the way appear steps unto heaven, in all that thou sendest me in mercy given, angels to beckon me." Verse 4, "Then with my walking thoughts bright with thy praise, out of my stony griefs Bethel I'll raise. So my woes to me, nearer, my God, to thee." And last, 5th verse, "Or if, on joyful wing, cleaving the sky, sun, moon, and stars forgot, upward I fly, still all my song shall be, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee." One of the great hymns that has been written. So going back to Jacob's journey to Haran and back. Starts off with Beersheba, the oath of the well, He stops at a certain place. It was called Lutz, or literally nut tree, or growing tree, green tree. And now he renames it Bethel, house of God. His destination is Haran, very bright like the sun. His journey is a little bit like our life. Our journey starts off as a covenant, our journey path, our covenant path. And it starts with our baptism. We make that covenant, and we head into the drone and leery, dreary, parched world. We find spiritual growing trees, which turn us to the house of God and keep us on the covenant path back to someone very bright like the Son, Jesus Christ. In his dream, Joseph Smith said, this quote ends up with Joseph Smith. In his dream, Jacob saw a ladder reaching from the earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it. Above the ladder stood the Lord, who, as we must assume that Jacob ascended the ladder, covenanted with Jacob, as he had with Abraham and Isaac, to bless him and his posterity throughout all generations. He was told, as had been his fathers, that through his seed all the families of the earth would be blessed. Joseph Smith tells us that the three principal rounds of the Jacob's ladder were the same ascended by Paul, and they do represent progression from telestial to terrestrial and from terrestrial to celestial degrees of glory. Now, he's still on his journey. You can picture him. And as he reaches a point, he can see that there's a well. That's what this picture is trying to depict. And over the well is a great big rock. Chapter 29, Jacob went on his journey, came to the land of people of the east. He looked and behold the well of the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. That means there's going to be other shepherds there too. And they that watered the flocks, a great stone was upon the well of the mouth. A lot of times these big stones were there to make sure there's no dirt and dust getting out. But if it's big enough, it's also to make sure that no one who's just coming by can lift it out and steal some of the water. You have to have multiple people there. You lift it all at once. And verse 3, and thither all the flocks were gathered, and they rolled out the stone from the mouth's well, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again in the well's place at his mouth. So the Interpreter's Bible just talks about that custom. The custom of a great stone over the mouth of the well was so great that it took a number of men to move it, thus ensuring no one person would be able to do more than his fair share of that precious water. When Jacob approaches the well, he found shepherds with the flocks loitering there, waiting for others to come and help them roll the stone aside. Jacob simply went to the well and rolled it aside himself. How was he able to do it? Someone, tongue-in-cheek, had suggested that he'd already met Rachel and had kissed her. Thereby he had unusual energy, excitement, and power. Yeah, I just thought it was kind of a cute thought. Put that in. Raphael had a magnificent picture of him where he's in his mind, here's how Jacob meets Rachel at the well. Verse 10, it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock, only of Laban, his mother's brother. Come on, this is now another one of those Hulk-like moments where I see the cute girl, I now have incredible strength, and I can do this by myself. And to prove that you have my attention, I'm going to water your flocks and only your flocks. And then Jacob, he's going to have a really good almost first date here. And Jacob kissed Rachel, lifted up his voice, and cried. He wept. He is quite happy. She also has a sister. And of these two, the Bible describes, quote, Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Tender eyes means she was quiet and shy, while Rachel was much more outgoing. It has nothing to do with her looks or her eyes. Others do interpretate tender-eyed as meaning that her eyes were really attractive, but basically her only great feature. The latter of these two interpretations does make the most sense, in that the comparison stated Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful. So just in summary, I've read parts where people have said, oh, it just means that she's outgoing, quiet. That Leah was quiet, reserved, and Rachel's outgoing. And some have just said, oh, Rachel was beautiful, well-formed, and Leah, well, her eyes looked beautiful. And that was it. I don't know. But most people go with tender eyes, meaning maybe the eyes were the nicest part of her. But you know the story. They get asked to get married. Oh, this is going to be great. And a lot of my students, especially in high school, junior high, this is very, very foreign to them. And you have to stop and explain. Wedding celebrations at that time lasts about a week. And it's a celebration. It's also customary at that time, the older daughter to be married first. And then the younger daughters get married. The bride at this wedding is veiled. It's also in the evening. Jacob's not able to see her face, and it's dark. And when he goes to her, it's dark. He can't see her. Scholars believe that this celebration includes wine, a lot of wine. And that's why in the morning you have Jacob coming out and being quite offended because he has been the night with Leah, not Rachel. He feels betrayed and tricked. And I just think at this point, the difficulty of this whole situation. And what would you be thinking if you're Leah? Where you have this tradition that you get married first, and now maybe you're excited, and now all of a sudden the man you just married and spent the first night with is feeling offended. How are you feeling if you're Rachel, knowing Jacob really loves you and you don't get to get married to him? Your older sister does. There's got to be some tears. Now, I know that there's a tradition that it really was Rachel and somehow, and that doesn't seem what the Bible says, even though it's a Jewish tradition. How does Laban feel? I mean, it's a deception. And you can kind of imagine what Jacob are feeling. This is a messy situation. Doesn't matter how you look at it or whose moccasins you're standing in. It's difficult. And so you get in verse 30, afterwards, he went in also unto Rachel, marries Rachel too, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him, Laban, yet 7 other years. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated or loved less, she opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. What are you thinking if you're Leah? And you know, I'm not the favorite, and I'm not loved as much, and maybe you do feel a little hated here. These are some difficult dynamics that are going to last for years. Now, just kind of summary of here's where the family is. You have Abraham and Sarah, and remember you have Hagar, who has Ishmael and has some sons, and then Abraham and Sarah have Isaac, and Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have 2 children. Esau is over here, and Jacob, after Sarah dies, Abraham does marry Keturah. She has a few sons. Now, back to Esau, has 3 boys, and then Jacob's supposed to marry Rachel, but that doesn't happen, and instead, well, he marries Leah, and Leah has a handmaid, Zilpah. And then he also marries Rachel, and she has a handmaid, Bilhah. All 4 of these will sooner or later become Jacob's wives. And then you start to get some of the kids, and here's the order when they're born. Leah has Reuben first, then Simeon, then Levi, then Judah. And this whole time, you have this great sense, and we'll get to it in just like 20 seconds. Leah wants to be recognized and loved, and Rachel's barren. And so, well, Rachel says, I'm going to give you my handmaiden. So if I can't have kids, you can have it through my handmaiden. And so they're married. Bilhah gets married, and he has Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah realized, I can't have any more kids. So, hey, now you can have my handmaid. And now this 4th wife, he has a son, Gad, and Asher. And then Leah has another kid, Ishkar, and Zebulon, and then a sister, Dinah. And finally, Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin. And that's in next week's lesson. But going back to Leah, you look at what she names her first 4 sons and just tells you where her heart is for years. Reuben means, look, a son. Or the Lord has seen my misery. She's naming her son Reuben because she's feeling a little vindicated. She hoped that, hey, look, I got a son, now you'll love me. Second son is hearing, or the Lord's heard that I'm not loved. Jacob didn't love Leah as much, and God heard that and sent her another son. So now we're getting years go by, and now we get Levi, joined, pledged. My husband will become attached. I want my husband to become attached to me. Leah hoped that Levi would endear Jacob to her and serve to strengthen their marriage and Jacob's love for her. And now in the fourth son, Judah, which means praise, or I will praise the Lord. She felt blessed to be able to bear so many children and possibly to have a gift which beautiful Rachel didn't have. That is some very complicated and messy family situation there. And in the Bible, it's there for all of us to see how they deal with it, how they may struggle with it. Well, chapter 30 gives that little history where Jacob marries Bilhah, bears a couple kids, then he marries Zilpah, marries a couple kids, Leah has a couple more kids, and then Rachel conceives and bears Joseph. And also the time during this chapter, you have 7 years where Jacob's serving for Leah, 7 years for Rachel, and then another 6 years to be able to get some cattle for him to be on his own. And now all these other names have meanings, and I'll put this in the notes on my webpage. You're welcome to look at what all these names mean, or just pause this right here, okay? Now just think, Jacob's now serving Laban for 20 years. And then in chapter 31, the Lord says to Jacob, return to the land of thy fathers. It's time to go home, to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. Now the kindred's going to include Esau, and there's going to be a little bit of a challenge there coming up. But I love the promise. Return, I will be with you. There should be a lot of confidence when God says, I'm going to be with you. I want you to do this, and I'm going to be with you. And if God's with you, it doesn't matter who's against you. It all works out. But as Jacob goes to leave, he's now worried. Worried that, if he leaves and tells Laban, maybe he won't let him go. Maybe he'll keep his daughters. Maybe he'll keep his grandchildren. Maybe he's not quite happy with this. And so you get in verse 14, as he tells his two wives, Rachel and Leah answered him, says, okay, you want to leave, and you want to leave quietly. Is there any portion of inheritance for us in our father's house? If you leave, we get nothing of Dad's. There's some things we're attached to, including Dad and Mom. Are we not counted of him strangers? For he has sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours, and our children's. Now then, all that aside, what faith these two women have. Whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. We're going to miss it. We know it. This is really emotional and difficult for us. But God told you to do it. Let's do it. 17, Jacob rises up, sets his camels, wives on the camels. They carry everything away. Laban went to shear his sheep. And verse 19, Rachel takes a couple little trinkets along with her that are not hers, that are pretty valuable to Dad. Images often implies that these are false gods. These are like little stone gods or wooden gods. Now, you just think about this from Laban's perspective. You get told your kids, your daughters, and your grandkids are gone. Now, you'll miss your daughters, but some of the greatest blessings you have call you grandma and grandpa. And grandchildren, you are my favorite hello and my hardest goodbye. That's coming from a granddad, okay? I love my kids. But it's really fun to be with your grandkids. So Laban, you can picture him. I'm going to chase. Meets up with Jacob, and he's like, and you get quite a few verses. What are you doing? Why did you do this? Well, and then Jacob just summarizes quite honestly and openly. Jacob answered Laban, because I was afraid. doesn't say, I know God said he'd be with me. God blesses the righteous. I know God's going to bless me. But then I just focused on my fears and not on my faith. Fear, for I said, peradventure thou would take by force the daughters it gave me. President Gordon B. Hinckley said this about fear. Who among us can say that he or she has not felt fear? I know of no one who's been entirely spared. Some, of course, experience fear to a greater degree than do others. Some are able to rise above it quickly, but others are trampled and pulled down by it, and even driven to defeat. We suffer from the fear of ridicule, the fear of failure, the fear of loneliness, the fear of ignorance. Some fear the present, some the future. Let us recognize that fear does not come of God, but rather that this gnawing, destructive element comes from the adversary of truth and righteousness. Fear is the antithesis of faith. It is corrosive in its effects, even deadly. God has given us the power of the gospel to lift us above our fears. We need not fear as long as we have in our lives the power that comes from righteously living by the truth which is from God our eternal Father. Nor need we fear as long as we have the power of faith. I have seen time and time again that love of God can bridge the chasm of fear. Love for the church can also lift one above doubt. This may be a really good time just to have a discussion in a classroom or in a house. What do you learn from Jacob and from Laban? And you can have great discussions about faith and fear and forgiveness. Well, also, I would just say for Rachel and Leah, I just love their faith. Whatsoever God has said unto thee, do. We know what we're going to lose, but let's do what God wants us to do. Maybe there's lessons in there to communicate a little bit better. Don't let your fear eclipse faith. I'm just doing a couple things that I just noted. The love of God can bridge the chasm of fear. Don't assume things. Sometimes we assume things because of our fears that are just so out there and paralyze us. And as Brother Wilcox has said, maybe one of the things that we learn here and in just a minute, if others have hurt you, forgive them, especially if they are members of your own family. And I love a little note in there as they're having these discussions and they're being reunited and they're just celebrating. And there's this note, the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. What a great tender thought. That's our prayer as grandparents. Let God watch us, watch between me and thee, especially those grandkids, when we're absent from each other. So we get to chapter 32, verse 3. Jacob's about to turn home, and he remembers all things from Esau. And he's like, okay, I gotta see what's up with Esau. Is he still mad at me? Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, on the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau. He also cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Now maybe I'm just doing that for dramatic effect, but that's the way Jacob takes it. And 400 men with him. That was my manly, Avenger voice, okay? Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And I'm thinking, why? Well, think about what's happened with Esau. Remember when they're getting blessings from Dad, and he doesn't get the blessing. My heart just goes out to him. He's pleading for a blessing from Isaac after Jacob took his blessing by deception. He perceives that when he marries somebody who's not of the covenant, and he perceives, that didn't go very well with Mom and Dad, then he seeks to make amends by marrying someone of the covenant. So Genesis 28:6, Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away, Pandam Aram, to take him a wife from thence, and that he shall be blessed him as he gave him a charge, saying, thou shalt not take a wife of daughters of Canaan. And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and was gone to Padam Aram. And Esau, seeing the daughters of Canaan, pleased not his father. Then Esau went unto Ishmael, and took unto the wives which he had Mahlaleth, the daughter of Ishmael's Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife, daughters of the covenant. Okay, I'm trying to make amends. But maybe Esau, in this Jacob's mind, Esau's thinking about a mess of pottage and how the birthright went for a mess of pottage. Maybe as Jacob is focusing more on the goat's skins that were on his arms, maybe brother Jacob is just focusing, I've been gone 20 years. And Esau's had an opportunity to savor how he's going to take revenge. Jacob is convinced they are coming to destroy him. His assumptions about his brother is severe, thinking Esau will kill his wives and children also. How often we make similar suppositions about the reactions of those whose forgiveness or reconciliation we seek. And this may hold us back. Jacob fears, we may add that they are false fears, cause him to plead fervently with the Lord and wrestle all night, seeking God's blessing. And it's a wonderful thing to seek God's blessing. I think it's a wonderful thing to maybe all night. But Brother Wilcox points out, you're doing all these wrestlings based on a false supposition. You're assuming when you shouldn't make that assumption. Well, this is one of the iconic scenes of the Bible that will have a lot of repercussions. I've often wondered, why is the word wrestle in there? And why is it all night? I think one of the great things about this next few verses that it teaches us is Jacob needed to learn something about Jacob. Jacob needed to become more than what his name meant, Supplanter. He needed to become someone who trusts in God and let God prevail in his heart. Jacob's wrestle represents the crisis in Jacob's spiritual history. It records his meeting with the heavenly being, the change of his name to Israel, and the blessings of the being that wrestled with him, and the consequent transformation of his character. Commentators in all ages regarded the contest as symbolic, an outward manifestation in the struggle within the Patriarch, as in every mortal, between his baser passions and his nobler ideals. In the dead of night, he had sent his wives and sons, and all that he had across the river. Jacob was left alone with God, there in the darkness. Given over to anxious fears, God's messenger was wrestling with him who had so often wrestled with men and won by sheer energy, persistency, and superior wit. He, Jacob, strove with an angel and prevailed. He, Jacob, wept and made supplication to him. That supplication for mercy, forgiveness, and divine protection is heard. Jacob, the supplanter, becomes Israel, Prince of God. This mysterious encounter of the Patriarch has become the universal human allegory of the struggles and wrestlings on the eve of some dreadful crisis, in the solitude and darkness of some overhanging trail. After that wrestle, I love the change. I think the change in name is inspired because of the change of heart. And he said, "Your name shall no more be called Jacob, but Israel." And the reason? For you've struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. The change in the name of Jacob to Israel is significant. Jacob means supplanter, or one who overthrows. Israel means Prince of God, one who strives with God, one who rules with God, one who wrestles with God, one who prevails with God, and soldier of God. Jacob not only wrestled with God, but in so doing became one who would rule with God and a soldier of God. As President Russell M. Nelson has encouraged lately, really, the name of Israel means let God prevail. So in our lives, let God prevail. President Russell M. Nelson has said, quote, "When your greatest desire is to let God prevail, to be part of Israel, so many decisions become easier. So many issues become non-issues. You know how to best groom yourself. You know what to do, read and watch. You know how to spend your time and with whom to associate. You know what you want to accomplish. You know the kind of person you really want to become." And it's at this point when he's become. Jacob lifts up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. And now, you could think about all of the hair on the arms, or the mess of pottage and birthright. But maybe what the author here really wants you to remember is this scene. And Esau ran to meet him, Jacob, and embraced him, and fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. There's not a concern about the past. There is forgiveness. And I think Christ wanted us to realize that the importance of this grand event. Because when he gives the parable of the prodigal son, he concludes it by, and he arose the prodigal son arose, came to his father, and who was yet a great far off, his father saw him, had compassion, and ran and fell upon his neck and kissed him. There's parallels there. We're all prodigal sons coming back, prodigal daughters, but we all have the opportunity to be maybe a little bit like Esau and forgive, to mend. And in chapter 33, there's another message that I think is just beautiful. There's a phrase, he came near to, in verse 3, and in 6, and in 7, twice. No, that's kind of coming closer, right? But I love the way Brother Brad Wilcox explained it. He said this, I'm aware that in both Joseph and Jacob's stories, the words came near means simply they approached. But let us give them deeper meaning in spiritual and emotional retying of family relationships. In families, forgiveness, especially the coming near, may be the fulfillment of mercy. Our invitation to family members to come near, inasmuch that nearness does not continue to create harm, becomes the completing action to full forgiveness. We can say, I forgive you. We can also say, come near to me. Is not the ultimate coming near the essence of the atonement? Jesus initiating, facilitating, inviting all of us to come near the Father into eternal felicity. Elder Marvin D. Hanks said, what is our response when we are offended, misunderstood, unfairly or unkindly treated, or sinned against, or made an offender for a word, falsely accused, passed over, hurt by those we love? Are offerings rejected? Do we resent, become bitter, hold a grudge? Or do we resolve the problem if we can, forgive, and rid ourselves of the burden? The nature of our response to such situations may well determine the nature and quality of our lives, here and eternally. Even if it appears another may be deserving of our resentment or hatred, none of us can afford to pay the price of resenting or hating because of what it does to us. Now, just some thoughts on teaching this. Really, as you kind of summary, or you can even start the lesson this way, what did you learn from your reading, or what did you learn from what we discussed today from Jacob's family, from his experiences, that could help you with your family? And if you're giving 5-7 minutes just to have this discussion, what one person may say would maybe bless another. Or maybe in a family, what one daughter says may bless a son, or vice versa. Whom could you forgive or show more love towards in your family today? And let's make a plan. How are you going to do that? The idea of forgiveness really started with Christ, made it all possible. But today, it can start with me. I can choose to forgive. Forgiveness blesses me more than it'll ever bless anyone else who's offended me. And you could have a little discussion, how's forgiveness blessed you? Because if you're in a class, odds are there's probably somebody who's still struggling to forgive, and maybe the blessings others have received will encourage them to forgive another. Thanks for spending some time with me as we've studied chapters 28 to 33 of Genesis. Hope you have a lovely day. Take care.